Jason Gilbert here at Fantasy Football Cafe. Happy Thursday. If you're watching the Chiefs Broncos right now, take a little break. Get the news here with stardom and sit 'em this week for week 2. Starting with quarterbacks, Carson Palmer. If he's your backup out there or out there for streaming, fire him up against a bad defense for the Bears, who Rodgers just torched. Although obviously Palmer is not Rodgers, he just thrashed the battered Saints defense, throwing for 307 yards and 3 touchdowns. Andre Ellington out. Cardinals throwing the ball quite a bit. You gotta like him in Arians' offense there. Gonna throw the ball well. Granted, he did get that boost at the end with a 55-yard screen pass to David Johnson, who's gonna get some run this week with Ellington out. So gotta like Palmer there. So of course, if you have an elite QB, you're gonna nab him over Palmer. But if you got an on-the-fence guy and Palmer's your backup, roll out Palmer. Sam Bradford, his performance was somewhat disappointing despite throwing the ball 52 times and over 300 yards. A couple red zone draw plays kind of vultured a few touchdowns for him. Jordan Matthews may or may not have reached inside the pylon and grabbed him another one. With all these weapons, could you say Bradford could be vultured at times? Sure, you got Ryan Matthews, DeMarco Murray. We saw just a lot of Eagles points, but fairly spread out, and you saw Sproles got the ball a lot, which really helped out Bradford quite a bit. But I'm looking for a little more touchdowns out of Bradford here. He went in for that mystery X-ray or whatever it was, but came out clean. I'm going to lock him in for week 2 against the Cowboys secondary, who is a bit battered as well, and projected another high-scoring affair there. So you got to like that, and Bradford should be thrown once again a fair amount of times. Looking at guys who I'm thinking about sitting this week, Ryan Tannehill, pretty poor outing against the Redskins defense. Jaguars defense isn't that bad. They've limited touchdowns despite allowing passing yards last season. Their struggles come stopping the run. So you could see Lamar Miller get a little bit more work this week. I'm not really sold on Tannehill for week 2, although I think he's going to have a great 2015 season. It's not going to start this week. There's just probably too many better options than Tanny right now. And a popular sit this week is Matt Stafford. Vikings really stopped Colin Kaepernick. It was the run that they couldn't stop. And, Vikings ranked 7th in passing yards allowed last season, no changes coming into 2015. And Stafford, despite a high volume, amount of throws, he can't find the end zone. That was a problem last season. I think that's going to be a problem again in 2015 here, judging by his first start, especially if he's not going to throw to Calvin Johnson, who was 4 or 5 targets or whatever he was at in week 1. So a little disappointing. I expect Amir Abdullah to get a lot of touches this week. So that'll transition right into running backs. Amir Abdullah, start him up. If you had less options, he found a way into your lineups. But if he was your 3rd or 4th option behind a couple of guys, he likely sat on your bench like with me and outscored about 2 other running backs I had starting. So it was a bit disappointing. But I think we're seeing a playmaker, a big-time fantasy playmaker in the makings. We already saw a 24-yard TD scamper there. Got 7 attempts on the ground, but made the most of them. And he found himself involved in the passing game, which is good to see. So you got to like him this week with what Hyde just did. Although 2 different style runners, Abdullah's going to touch the ball and score a ton of points. Look for a bounce-back week with Justin Forsett. Faces an average Raiders defense, who just allowed a decent amount of points to Hill on the ground, as well as Bernard in the passing game. And, they were one of the top teams last season in allowing fantasy points to running backs. I think you're going to see Forsett be a little bit of a focal point for Flacco in that Baltimore offense this week. Sitting for me, LeGarrette Blount, who's due back from suspension from the Patriots, but facing the Bills defense on the road, I don't expect them to give up a lot of points for Blount there. And facing this Bills defense at home, it's going to be a big no-no for me in fantasy this season. They're just too good, and Rex Ryan and that team is looking pretty dangerous. So he's probably going to be a decent play at times this season, but it's not going to be week 2. Yeldon, making his way back on my sitting list again. He's really touchdown reliant on a team that's not going to score a ton of touchdowns. He had 12 attempts for 4.2 yards per carry, but he's going to need a ton of ground and grab a score for value. Dolphins defense, although Morris had 100-something yards there last week, still a front tough 7. Looking at wideouts, this may shock you a little bit because of the Redskins offense, but Pierre Garcon going to get a lot more looks. Decent matchup against the Rams, who, Seahawks wide receivers, although they're not great, they put up their share of points against that secondary there. So that's something to watch going forward. I think they're better off at stopping the run. And I think with Deshaun Jackson out here, you're going to get a lot of looks for Garcon. Going to be a featured wideout. Going to be enough to hit value there going ahead this weekend. And starting with the obvious, Terrence Williams for the Cowboys going to have upside with Des Bryant out for whatever the amount of time is. I've seen numerous reports, but it's going to be quite a few weeks there. So secondary did not look sharp in Philly as Julio Jones and Roddy White torched that secondary. Vegas has that big total there, so you got to like that. Once again, Andre Johnson could be a trap play this week because everyone's going to think, yeah, Hilton could be out, questionable here with the knee issue, going to be in line for a lot more targets, but how useful are those targets if he's going to be on Revis Island? Curious to see who lines up against him. I think it could be a very down week for Johnson yet again. I'm also not a fan of Devontae Adams facing a tough secondary in Seattle. He failed to really wow us against Chicago despite seeing a fair amount of targets. I just think there's a lot of better matchups out there than Adams versus Seattle this week. Tight ends, just real quick. Greg Olsen, going to bounce back. Just make sure you get him in your lineup and you have him there. Don't have a short leash. They're going to get him the ball. Saw reports that they're going to force him the ball, so that's good news there. Also, Tyler Eifert, not a fluke. Fire him up again. A solid tight end there out of Notre Dame. As usual, they just churn him out. And like sitting for me, Colts tight ends. Yeah, Dwayne Allen got a nice garbage touchdown there, but they are too reliant. I think Fleener, even if Hilton's out, still not going to be reliant enough to get into my lineups there, so it's tough. A few defenses to sit this week. The 49ers, they're going to face an elite Steelers offense. All 49ers look pretty good against the Vikings. If you have them and believed in them, even with all their drops from the offseason, I'm sitting them this week. Also not a fan of the Cardinals defense. They shut down Drew Brees at home, but I think there's elsewhere with higher upside. So if you have any start-sit questions, head over to Fantasy Football Cafe, the forums. You'll receive pretty much an instant response. A lot of great minds on there floating around all the time online. So that'll be it, and let's enjoy week 2.